Good afternoon. This is a joint Economic Development Committee work session with the Planning, Housing, and Parks Committee. This is a follow-up of a session that the ECON had back in July on agritourism. And we agreed that we were going to follow up after the Department of Agriculture finished up their report, which was published back in October. So this session is only a briefing. We're going to talk about what the report says, and I'm going to tell you right from the beginning, I'm eager to learn what are the follow-up steps after this report. Is there legislation in Annapolis coming up regarding some of these recommendations or not? So that's something that I think we need to dig into if you have that information available. I'm going to ask my co-chair to offer some words before we start.
I'll just be very brief. I appreciate the indulgence of allowing me to join the Economic Development Committee work session that we had before, and I think this is a really important conversation that dovetails pretty significantly into land use, and I appreciate the involvement of the Office of Agriculture and our state partners as well. There are a lot of moving parts, as we can see from this report, and figuring out the interface between the state and the county, and also how we address the current interests with the long-standing commitment that the county has had on protecting and preserving the agricultural reserve, which is one of the most important land conservation decisions, not just in Montgomery County's history, but anywhere in the United States. So appreciate this conversation. It's important, it's timely, and look forward to digging into it.
Excellent. As we move forward, I would also like to thank the Maryland Department of Environment for being here today. Although this report was done by the Department of Agriculture, the fact that they're here shows how interconnected all these issues are. And obviously, thank you to Mr. Michael Schaffel for all his work with the Montgomery County Office of Agriculture. This is an issue that we have heard a lot from a lot of people. I know that every time I go to Up County, somebody tells me, oh, we watched that session and they have ideas. And I had to remind folks, what we're going to be doing today is only a briefing. That's all. With that, I'm going to ask Council staff to please kick us off. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. It's just a very brief packet, just sort of pointing you to the study and the slides that they'll present. We did write a little bit about opportunities for the councils, as the chair of the Economic Development Committee referenced, getting updates on state initiatives, figuring out other ways to work with the state delegation to support some of the ideas that are in this study. There are also opportunities to undertake some of these concepts as pilot programs locally, recognizing that any changes at the state level could impact some ideas that you implement here in the meantime. And lastly, just referring you back to the agritourism work session that you all had in July at the ECON committee, which actually also outlined ways to directly talk about appropriate land uses and activities in the agricultural reserve that are not related to agritourism. So you can have a full discussion about all of those opportunities. With that, I'll turn it over to the experts, and we have some slides for you all.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee, and Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Martin Prue. I'm the Value-Added Agricultural Specialist with the Maryland Department of Agriculture, and I think I'll let my panel introduce themselves.
Good afternoon, Les Knapp. I'm the Assistant Director for the Water and Science Administration at the Maryland Department of the Environment.
Good afternoon, everybody. Mike Schaffel, Director, Office of Agriculture. Thanks for having me.
And I believe I will be doing the majority of the presenting. We're here before you today to share some background and information on a recently published document that the Maryland Department of Agriculture has been working on for the past several months. This document is known as the Statewide Guidance and Analysis Document for Value-Added Agriculture and Agritourism. And we can go to the slides. Sure. I can also just jump into some brief background and introduction before we talk about the document. For today's presentation, I wanted to briefly give a background on value-added agriculture as a theme, this capacity as value-added agricultural specialist and its history, the efforts and initiatives surrounding not just the role, but the document that we bring before you today. Next slide, please. So just some background on the value-added agricultural specialist role and value-added agriculture as a concept. In 2023, the Maryland General Assembly created a value-added agricultural specialist position within the Maryland Department of Agriculture. If you're familiar with the Maryland Department of Agriculture, you know it's primarily a regulatory agency as it relates to resource conservation, pest and plant management, animal health, consumer services, etc. But also being the regulatory body as it relates to agriculture and farm-based operations throughout the state, the Maryland Department of Agriculture lacked a liaison between the community and the industry and the regulatory framework as it relates to this evolving concept of value-added agriculture, which through this legislation was defined to include a lot of things. Next slide, please. So I won't read that definition as a whole, but when we talk about value-added agriculture in concept, we're thinking about taking a raw agricultural product and processing it in some way to add value to that product and the farmer's bottom line. However, it's been clear through the evolution of value-added agriculture in the state of Maryland that there are many more ways to increase profit margins than just changing a raw product. There are experiential value to be added through the form of agritourism and education, as well as marketing value in the form of packaging, distribution, and overall marketing and promotion. So if I were to break this role into two tracks, the first is the day-to-day of offering the navigatory services to farms and agricultural producers, new or existing, interested in expanding their enterprise into anything within this value-added agricultural umbrella. So the Maryland Department of Agriculture does a lot of oversight and regulating of raw agricultural products and farming practices, but when you expand into what is value added, whether that's processing or agritourism, you are expanding into new regulatory territory as it exists and includes other state departments and agencies such as the Maryland Department of Environment, Maryland Department of Health. You might not know this, but the Maryland Department of Labor inspects amusement rides. The State Fire Marshal Office also expects to approve and permit corn mazes. So it really opens the door to a lot of regulatory frameworks that a traditional agricultural operation may not be exposed to. So understanding of each roadmap to compliance is important, and that's what we exist to support the industry with. However, we can only guide businesses through law and policy as it exists. That does not mean that the law and policy that exists is the best case scenario. So another track within this role is identifying regulatory challenges and opportunities. This has really opened the door for a lot of collaboration with our fellow state agencies as it relates to how agriculture, especially agriculture as it is ever changing, is being regulated. Especially those that are getting established in the state or families that are making plans for the next generation to keep farming and feeding the community. Next slide, please. So I wanted to just bring your attention to one forum for problem solving that already exists as far as public-facing bodies. So the Governor's Intergovernmental Commission on Agriculture, it's the first time, or the only time I'm going to say it out, I'll call it GICA from now on. GICA has existed for a number of years, but just this year, Governor Moore signed an executive order to expand the GICA body. So for those unfamiliar, GICA is a body that is chaired by Secretary Addix of the Maryland Department of Agriculture and made up of members of the state cabinet, as well as some industry stakeholders and industry organizations. The commission was just meeting as a full commission, but as of last year formed some subcommittees, one of which is the Agritourism and Value-Added Agricultural Subcommittee, which has been meeting bi-monthly for almost a full year now. That has been a vessel where we have brought up a lot of challenges facing agriculture, even before the publication of the document that we are going to talk about a bit today. So what we've all come here to hear about and learn a bit more. The statewide guidance document, again, published in October 2025. On the screen is the QR code that will take you to the electronic publication. The statewide guidance document was drafted really for a need for foundational understanding, not just industry-wide, but policy and regulation-wide of what the state of Maryland's value-added agriculture and agritourism enterprises look like today. This document's a comprehensive overview of value-added agriculture and agritourism and takes a peek at the complexities that exist when there are so many regulatory layers, not just the traditional underlying agricultural operations, but when we expand into other types of value-added agriculture and themes. Before we move on, I'll say for your familiarity, this document was inspired by a Maryland Department of Planning document that was published a few years ago in partnership with the Maryland Forestry Association and Department of Natural Resources. That was a state guidance document on forestry. Forestry is an industry, obviously, that has many different faces, but sometimes misconceptions can lead us to view it as relatively large. You'll see me air quote the word commercial industry. And that was a 30-page document. Obviously, we know that you aren't seeing pizza ovens in forests, nor are you seeing parking lots in forests. So we knew we were in for a lengthier and denser document for sure. But we figured this was a great baseline for us to continue dialogue and really identify where the pain points are in supporting and nurturing value-added agriculture throughout the state. So the statewide guidance document is laid out as such through the purpose, intent, and implementation, the evolution, some background on how we got here. But the three sections I really wanted to cover for you today before opening it up to questions and answering anything specific you may be interested in is just the regulatory framework and the segments that we thought were necessary to kind of identify and lay out in depth as it relates to how state regulation trickles down to local implementations and enforcement, and then the challenges and opportunities that were clearly identified through this process. So just, again, some background on how the regulatory framework of the guidance part of the statewide guidance document it lays out. The document identifies 4 regulatory themes within value added. I think a few slides ago we saw how massive this definition is for value-added agriculture, and in trying to have dialogue about it with it meaning so much and covering so many different types of activities, it can be very challenging. So this document breaks value-added agriculture into 4 regulatory themes, really recognizing how each of these themes are regulated at different levels or in different ways. So value-added processing is a state Department of Health oversight. That is taking a raw product and manufacturing it primarily for wholesale distribution. When we talk about agritourism and food service, we are very locally focused. Agritourism is primarily a land use when it's being permitted and approved, and food service, not processing, but food service, whether that be farmers market sampling or scooping ice cream at the farm, you're looking at a local health department oversight. So it was really important to clarify that when we talk about various agencies that may have different levels, like the health department. The retail sales of value-added products needed to be spelled out separately because, again, very similar to agritourism and food service, it is regulated a bit differently, uniquely, and also can have some implications at the local land use level as it relates to what the word retail means and what sales could mean. So retail sales of value-added products, if a farmer is raising their own steer and taking them to get processed and bringing that meat back, they may have a state-issued license to store those beautiful frozen cuts of T-bone steak and sell them to the consumer. But if they want to take their neighbor's yogurt and put it in a refrigerator next to that meat, they've catapulted themselves into a food service facility license, very similar to what many stores are required to have. Definitely a different level of risk as it's identified through the framework, but nevertheless, separate licensure without necessarily knowing it. And then other is certainly that category for everything that is not necessarily food focused. Other also includes aquaculture, contained environment agriculture, the composting, all of these other activities that farms need to do to be successful. And then after identifying these themes, we jumped into defining agriculture. Not the definition of agriculture, because there's not just one, but all of the varying definitions of agriculture and why they look so different. Some definitions of agriculture, whether it be at the state, federal, or even local level, might be relevant to a certification and might not be land use specific. Whereas you have definitions that are very specific to what is happening on the land. Some examples being the Department of Assessment and Taxation using the agricultural use assessment and having a revenue-based floor, whereas locally in a table of permissible uses at a county level, there would be actual actionable activities that exist to be considered agriculture or not. So we went through that a little bit and also identified where some challenges exist with some outdated definitions of agriculture, where agriculture is recognized as growing products and storing products, but not necessarily selling products or welcoming members of the public to the farm to engage with those products and learn more a bit about farming in Maryland. We also touched on land use and just the complexities. There's a zoning matrix that was published by the University of Maryland Agricultural Law Education Initiative that had a really helpful matrix that compared counties side by side as far as their table of permissible uses, and it furthers the challenges laid out in defining agriculture, showing that I think the most popular term used in local zoning was only used across 18 of 24 local jurisdictions, and that was agricultural activity. So that just goes to show that across the state, there isn't even a unified definition in land use and code that is recognizable. So when the state references things like agritourism can only happen on a farm, and local jurisdictions, only about half of the counties throughout the state have definitions of farm, we all get a little curious of where are we looking? What is the standard for this? Which we'll get to here in some of the opportunities and challenges. But when it gets to navigating regulatory framework, we, through our engagement of this document, which included a lot of public engagement, regulator engagement, and public conversations, we realized that it was really important to take a step back and make sure we, across the regulatory framework, are understanding the best way to navigate businesses and support businesses through compliance and regulation. So navigating regulatory framework was really important to make sure we all know that starting local is important. There's certainly state implications, but we run into a lot of challenges when businesses and enterprises are not asking the right questions locally before going to the state for a license or a permit or approvals. So we're breezing through this, which will save some time for conversations and questions, but the challenges that came out of this document were pretty clear by the end of the process. And first and foremost, it was clear that there's no unifying definition of farms or agriculture. The Maryland Department of Agriculture does not have a statutory definition of what agriculture or a farm is. In nutrient management law, there's definition, but that definition is actually commercial farm. When we talk about commercial and agriculture often being water and oil, when you get to sort of land use and some policy discretion. So that was very clear. It makes it really difficult to enforce things from the state, trickling down to the local level and meeting in the middle when there's no guiding definition or concept for not just what is agriculture, but what is value-added agriculture. What do farms need to be in Maryland to continue to be successful, as we're losing farmland every year in, year out? The next one is more so program specific, but it was realized that there's fragmented measurables for tracking the industry growth and expansion. We had mentioned how value-added processing and the wholesale distribution of products is state licensed. When we talk about food service and agritourism, these are often local approvals and aren't in a state database by any means. So currently, through the value-added agricultural program, we are tracking the industry and the growth of the industry through piecemealing state-issued licenses, whether that be through the ATCC for wineries and breweries, through the Maryland Department of Health for those that are under an on-farm home processing license, USDA approvals for meat processing, and MDA's various licenses as it relates to producer mobile food license, egg packing licenses, etc. But currently, the measurables really do lack in regards to just destinations and bringing members of the public onto the farm to better understand where their food comes from and what Maryland agriculture requires to be successful. We've talked about it a little bit, but obviously a big challenge is that industry moves faster than the speed of government. I think a lot of industries move faster, but agriculture is getting very, very creative. So there's clearly outdated regulatory language and licensing structures for value-added agriculture. There's also lacking clarity and consistency in processes and regulation. I think we kind of made that clear as to why that may be happening. When you trickle something so standard at the state level down that is then different across 24 counties to include Baltimore City, and varying local regulation and policy. And that ties into the fact that there's also limited scalability. There's no definition for seasonality at the state level right now. There's definitions for temporary as it relates to processing and food service, which may have some environmental health implications, but then everything else kind of leans permanent. Permanent infrastructure, hefty investment for agricultural enterprises. So we've realized that without that seasonality, recognizing what agritourism and value-added agriculture is becoming, that we're lacking that stepping stone to encourage small agricultural enterprises to take that first step to be able to generate that revenue and then make that long-term investment. There's plenty of examples across Maryland where there are small business incubators or resources available to help small businesses get started. There's not that many examples as it relates to agriculture when you're talking about a temporary concept to a permanent concept with nothing in between, recognizing the seasonality of all of this. So flipping that, the opportunities are probably going to become clear, but the opportunities published within the statewide guidance and analysis document start with the idea of establishing a foundational state definition and guidelines. And on the next slide, I will talk a little bit about some of the ongoing efforts as requested. But that's probably the biggest glaring need, is a North Star for everyone in Maryland to get behind and understand what encompasses agriculture today. And there are a lot of concepts and facets that involve members of the public, as well as the need to sell the product, market the product, and be unique, that come into play and might not be currently recognized in various regulatory structures. Potential state certification for qualified value-added agriculture. This by no means is identified as an added regulatory layer, rather than a way to assist the measurables and ability to track and support the growth of the industry. Maryland Department of Agriculture already has the Maryland's Best brand, which is specific to producers, whether that be farmers of raw agricultural products or manufacturers of value-added agricultural products. There is a self-listing and a self-promotion avenue that we allow to capture under our brand and better support through buyer-grower expos and other activities, but there's nothing for the agritourism side of the equation. Alternative licensing for farms and agritourism, the idea of recognizing that the farm is a farm first. I think that's, maybe we glazed over that, but the idea of agritourism and value-added agriculture is to further support an underlying agricultural operation. And there's still some licenses that are not farm-specific, which further the difficulty of tracking and supporting the core agricultural operations. So I mentioned the on-farm home processing license for the cut meat sold off the farm in frozen cut and wrap portions. There's a lot of examples with manufacturing and outbuildings. A farmer is growing grain and wants to mill that grain into bags of flour to sell, but they set up in an outbuilding, not necessarily a home kitchen, they are under a processing license, which is an umbrella license for everything else. The commercial bakery in Baltimore City or the spice company in Baltimore County are all under that same license. Definitely different standards, but it's really hard for us at the Department of Agriculture and those supporting agriculture to clearly be able to identify what is the farm and what isn't a farm under that licensing database. So finding ways to identify farms and agritourism operations that way could be really helpful in not only identifying who's currently being successful in the state, who's coming online in the state, but also how can we program and support these operations more specifically. And then lastly is the scalable regulations. Seasonality, absolutely something that should be considered within state code. And again, understanding that farms and diversifying agricultural operations are not necessarily making a commitment for the future. They are trying to diversify to keep their operation successful. And sometimes that may take a couple tries, but if each try is going to cost a significant amount of money and investment in infrastructure, it could be really difficult for that operation to identify the appropriate means and path forward. So just to familiarize you with some of the ongoing efforts, and again, this document published in October, some of these efforts were parallel to the final publication of this document, but two proposed regulations you should be familiar with, and I can't speak too much to the detail of it, but how it relates to this effort and the conversation. So there's two proposed regulations, one by the Maryland Department of Health and one from the Maryland Department of Environment, relevant to the value-added discussion. So in October last month, and I believe these posted proposed regulations will remain open through Monday for public comment. That's the 17th of November. There was a proposal to amend the on-farm home processing license language. The on-farm home processing license is the sweet spot in state licensing for agricultural processing that would allow farm-based enterprises growing their own ingredients to go into their home kitchen and make some value-added products, pickles, jams and jellies that might not be recognized under cottage food, allow farms to generate some of that revenue, kind of talking about the scalability we were discussing earlier. The challenge with that is there's also the idea of the meat and cheese processed off-site under that. But that's a lot of things that many Maryland producers are expanding into, and there was language under that license that required the farm to be owned. So with land access being a huge issue in the state, that seemed to be a fix that was necessary. The on-farm home processing license also had not had its revenue caps adjusted in quite a while, and the annual revenue cap for this on-farm home processing license was at $40,000, which is $10,000 less than cottage food law, which is unregulated. So the need to at least increase and meet that on par for the sake of a license that's actually applied for and approved seemed necessary. And most importantly, because meat and cheese fell under that license, the meat, which we see plenty of in this part of the state, was also subject to an annual revenue cap. So the idea of local meat and connecting the community to the food source seemed to be a little counterintuitive. So these proposed regulations as written and as proposed will exempt the meat and cheese from any revenue cap. So we won't have to worry about that. Again, public comment still open through Monday, but we will see what feedback is gotten, and when that becomes final, it will be a far more accessible license for many.
Can you explain the time frame? When is it? What's the date for this to become final?
I guess it depends, and I don't believe the Department of Health is here to speak on it, but I think it has to do with what the public comment is and sort of what feedback they receive. Otherwise, implementation just goes through the typical process, but that will be changed and implemented within the licensure and the access of the licensure. And then maybe not necessarily a license, but an updated statewide regulations as it relates to stormwater management. I'll probably save till through this presentation to let my counterpart here at the Department of Environment speak on it, but the stormwater management regulations, the comprehensive update is being undertaken by the Maryland Department of Environment right now, and those are currently open, and I believe the public comment period is open until sometime in December, but I'll just leave that there. And then as it relates to the defining agriculture, I want you all to be aware that the Maryland Agriculture Commission, which is having public meetings, is currently discussing how to formulate and what a state definition of agriculture may look like, what might be the best steps forward in getting a statewide definition of agriculture, although I can't speak to the timeline of that because that is going to be a lot of engagement and industry stakeholder engagement.
Does it go through the General Assembly?
So that would depend on how this definition gets defined and introduced. I don't foresee anything as far as departmental. So it would come through a matter of when a definition is sort of agreed upon by the Ag Commission, if that's even the right avenue, or if we're talking about some kind of statewide understanding guidance document of this is how the Department of Agriculture recognizes it. I'm sure there's some kind of policy action at some point. I can't speak to the timeline of that at this time. And does that bring me? Yep, and that concludes.
So
the
for everything that you just said, there's not a time frame for all those three issues. Like
for the first two, the proposed regulations, absolutely, they'll be implemented after the public comment period, and
which ends when?
So for the Maryland Department of Health, I believe that is open until Monday, and for the stormwater management regulations,
I believe it's the beginning of December.
So do you conclude your remarks?
I conclude the presentation. Ready to
And
take questions.
do you want to speak now on any environmental issues on the stormwater management? Or?
I was here more for questions, but I can make a very short statement. I think broadly, Martin set out the challenges, and speaking as somebody who grew up on a farm, and who my mother still runs that farm in her mid-80s, and then understanding the county perspective in my time with the Maryland Association of Counties, and that now appreciating the regulatory complexities at the state level. This is not an easy issue, and I think Martin and the report does a great job of outlining the core challenges as you're seeing an industry that's very creative, very rapidly changing, and bumping up against the more traditional regulatory scheme. It's hard to do a one-size-fits-all solution here. If it had been easy, it would have already been done. There's been discussions of agritourism now literally for decades. But I think you kind of look at how, so Martin laid out the activities themselves, and how does that fit under agritourism? I'll give you an alternative way to consider that more from the regulatory and policy side of things. How connected are those activities to a farm or traditional farm activities or cultures in terms of determining should there be some specific regulatory changes? Are you dealing with something that's a value add from farming activities, or is this just a commercial activity that happens to be located on a farm? And so, for example, at the one end of the spectrum where there's an absolute connection to farming, you have your traditional things like hay rides, pick your own, corn mazes. Those activities really can't exist without an underlying farm to support them. So for those, I think you want to approach that trying to say, can we give some deference here? Can we give some things? Then you've got on the kind of the middle of the spectrum activities that can exist and do exist both separate from a farm, commercial operations, but can have a connection and be part of a farm and an enhanced agricultural value-added experience. And so, for example, there, wineries, breweries, distilleries, some craft sales, things of that nature, I think, can exist separately, but can also exist on the farm. And how do you want to manage those? And then at the far end of the spectrum, you have activities that traditionally aren't really associated with farms, but some farmers are now experimenting with agritourism. So you have like camping, bed and breakfast. I've seen proposals in other states for inner tubing, paintball courses, things of that nature, which really arguably maybe you just treat as separate commercial activities and they don't need any special deference or changes to our regs. So that's one point I'll make. Narrowing it now more to MDE, you've heard a lot about a lot of the issues deal with food and food processing. So that's the Department of Health. There's some building code issues, public safety issues. Where MDE really comes in is on two main fronts, or I should say three: water supply, wastewater, and stormwater management. And we have tried, and we are working through a number of different areas to address some of this. Some of it, our hands are a little tied with the food processing. Like when you're at a certain point with food processing, you have to have water under pressure, and you have to have wastewater facilities, full restrooms. So at that point, for most farms, you're going to have to deal with some type of large septic system. But prior to that, we do have some flexibility. Like there's small events, and I think, as Martin said, the seasonality concept is something that I think needs to be considered in the food world for where could we allow portable toilets for small scale events, and you don't have to go in for full restrooms. And there's some flexibility there, I think. Stormwater is another major area. And with that, we are, as Martin said, in the middle of doing a major update to our regulations. Now, to be clear, in Maryland, and some of this is driven by federal requirements, the Chesapeake Bay TMDL and other things, everybody has to manage their stormwater. It doesn't matter whether you're a residence, a single-family home, an apartment building, an industrial complex, a commercial office building, a government building. Even at the federal level, military buildings and federal buildings in Maryland manage their stormwater, and farms are no different here. And everybody has access to the same options. Farms, however, due to their very nature, typically have more open space. They might have cropland, meadowland, pasture land, and these are defined terms for the most part, that you have more options to treat your runoff, and most likely in a more cost-effective way. Could a farm put in rain gardens and other things you see in downtown Rockville? Absolutely. But they don't need to. They have other options too. So we're doing two things. One is working to highlight existing options, and our stormwater program is preparing kind of I'll call it a one-pager. It might be 2 pages, but outlining kind of the options that are available in a simple fashion. So you kind of can see the broad menu of what you could have. Moving forward, as Martin said, every 13 to 15 years, the states, since the 2000, we've been undertaking major stormwater management updates. And with climate change, with increased precipitation, weather events, increased flooding happening, these are major updates that try to modernize and update our regs and our requirements, and also our treatment options. So we're in the middle of proposing these regulations. They're out for advance notice of public rulemaking comment. We want to get those comments. I believe it's open through the end of December. I'll double check and get back to you if I'm incorrect there. Over the session, where we can't really move forward with regs while the state legislature is in session, we're going to examine those comments, prepare responses, and then propose and hopefully adopt the regs next year. And as a follow-up to that, we have committed specifically for agricultural parking lots of up to a certain size at least, creating what we call a standard plan, which if you kind of meet the broad criteria of that, you don't have to create a custom stormwater plan, hire an engineer, do a survey. You can just do a couple of options that are outlined there, and you can manage that.
But can you please clarify if this guidance document they're working on, are you gonna differentiate the stormwater management standards that you will have in agrotourism or in agriculture versus the ones that you're gonna have in downtown Silver Spring, for example? Because they're two very different places, but we're talking about stormwater management. They're gonna be treated differently. So, because that is not clear today.
So all stormwater is essentially the same. You have the same amount of impervious surface. It really doesn't matter whether you're on a farm or you're downtown or you're in somebody's backyard. the runoff and the impact to the environment and the potential for flooding is largely the same. However, the treatment options, and I think this is where it's gotten a little lost. I think of farms typically, because you have more space, you have more treatment options. These are options available to everybody, but for some, such as sheet flow management onto pasture land, well, downtown Rockville doesn't have much in the way of pasture land, but farms do. So that's a very cheap, potentially cost-effective way for farms to manage it. And we're going to highlight that and make that clear. In addition, and again, this is available to everybody though, we are allowing for some flexibility. In the last round of regulations, the focus was on smaller, site-specific environmental site designs, green practices, vegetated swales, rain gardens, etc. And that works, especially in like a heavily urbanized downtown. Doesn't work so much in some suburban areas or your rural areas. So we are building in with these regs some flexibility to have some larger scale, maybe a larger scale stormwater pond. We still want that to be green, but we're going to try to find that Goldilocks, what's just right here between large scale, big scale stormwater practices and these smaller site practices, and hopefully give people more options.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that briefing. I think it's so critical. And actually, before I say that, I want to thank Governor Westmore for moving this forward. As you mentioned before, this issue of the definition of agrotourism or even agriculture has been debated for so long, and nobody has actually taken the time to move forward and get some answers to this. And you guys are doing that work, and I want to thank you for that, because it makes it so difficult for the county to work on this when you guys are also working on this. I think we need to wait and see what's happening at the state, so then we can proceed. That's why I keep asking about the time frame. You got to get, my brain works with deadlines, and you need to tell me, Natalie, before November 2026, we're going to have A, B, and C. So that's what we expect. And hopefully soon we can have more concrete answers to this, because it will be helpful for everybody involved, okay? With that, I'm gonna open it up for questions. I'm gonna start with Councilmember Balcom.
So thank you. I appreciate the conversation, and I appreciate the report that we received a little while ago. So I'll just follow up with stormwater management, because we were just talking about that. So we are, we're in the middle of a couple issues, and thank you so much for participating in those discussions. And so would the expectation be that the Soil Conservation District be more involved? Will the regulations spell out who has authority, jurisdiction in stormwater management, or will that be left to the local jurisdictions?
I don't think at this moment we are looking to make any major changes with how soil conservation districts, their role versus the role of MDE or a county. I do know, I think Montgomery County does have an MOU with their soil conservation district that is a little different than other jurisdictions, and we're not looking to interfere with that local flexibility.
Okay, great, thank you. Which goes back to my first question that I was going to ask is, it's not a question, but a statement of jurisdiction. And so I think that having a state definition that talks about these things that aren't used statewide, I think it's important to have a state definition of agriculture and what that means. But then because of, and also there are things that the state from a licensure perspective certainly has jurisdiction over, but from a zoning perspective, the counties having jurisdiction over their zoning, I think, is very important. So I think that's an important distinction over what the state does and what the county does. So I think that's important. So just the example of the on-farm commercial kitchens, which is, I don't know if you would call it on-farm commercial kitchens or just on-farm kitchens, is so important for particularly our smaller farmers, and to provide that value-added activity. in a cost-effective manner. So I think that's important. But I think that there is a distinction between value-added definition and where that bleeds into agritourism in terms of what happens to the product after there's value added. So clear example would be somebody does jams and jellies, has the commercial kitchen, all that is distributed elsewhere, right? Then there's the other example where the value added is preparing meals, or preparing, not meals, but preparing product that's consumed on site or in the on site market. And when does that become value added versus agritourism? Don't know if you have a comment on that.
Sure. Council member, I'll take one step back just to clarify some things at the state level as it relates. When we say there's not a definition of agriculture, there's no land use definition of agriculture. There are some statutory definitions as it relates to policies. In the environment article, there's a definition for agricultural activity. It just recognizes the growing and pasturage of products, not the sales and agritourism. And then under the land use article, there are two separate definitions, one for agritourism and one for agricultural alcohol production, that are North Star definitions that can be adopted locally, but of course, because they are optional for the local jurisdictions and more guiding, they're really state references, but land use, they're not necessarily universal. So the challenges that are being exposed right now is that the idea of agriculture is not necessarily encompassing these other land use concepts of agritourism and agricultural alcohol production and things similar to that. Now, expanding into value-added agriculture and agritourism is absolutely value-added agriculture. Not all value-added agriculture is agritourism. I think the idea of members of the public setting foot on a farm has caused the most challenges in testing the regulatory framework. Because you've heard the term commercial get thrown around. And again, as I said earlier, commercial is in the definition commercial farm as it relates to nutrient management law. Farms are businesses and need to generate revenue to be successful. So commercial in concept, I think we can all agree upon. But when we talk about land use, commercial and agriculture is water and oil. When you talk about the zones, and Montgomery County is unique with the reserve, is that the idea of manufacturing, we consider value-added processing. If that gets considered manufacturing, you may have to look at a zoning code and realize that that does not fit within an agricultural or rural zone. Retail, or maybe food service. Maybe there's nothing to fit food service into on a table of permissible uses other than restaurant. Well, now we've run into another issue because local zone may not recognize agricultural or rural zones as an appropriate place for restaurants. So identifying and expanding value added as a core concept that can happen on an agricultural operation is definitely an appropriate way to encompass what farms can and can't do as they expand. If it's continued to be treated as this is a farm and then these are other generic activities that are being placed on the farm, we're going to continue to run into conflicts. Because the idea of a tasting room now serving pizza with flour that is milled by the farm itself, as a restaurant, they're going to take on all of those added regulatory layers that may contradict some of the specific agricultural underlying frameworks they've already established. To the stormwater management side, that's come up a great deal in that using, to your question about soil conservation districts, is that soil conservation districts have been subject, it seems, to the definition of agricultural activities to where they can offer their technical assistance. But because agricultural activities are as specific to the growing and the storage and the farm operations, as soon as that road or heavy use area for equipment is being used for members of the public, we've catapulted into that idea of commercial, and then everything that has been done or planned up to that point by a technical assistance provider that exists to support agriculture has certainly been completely mitigated because of the idea of jumping from agriculture to commercial fully.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And it's been very complex. And as you said, every time there's a new opportunity, then it goes back to where does that land from a licensure perspective? Where does it land from a land use perspective? And those things have not been determined yet. So I appreciate that. One final question. So I just, not pertaining to this study, but there is a shortage of large-scale food processing facilities in Maryland and certainly in Montgomery County. And just from your outside of this discussion, what is happening at the state level to try to get more opportunities for our farmers to have access to large-scale processing facilities?
Great question. So just to clarify, before I joined the Department of Agriculture, I come to the state by way of local economic development. And so there was a lot of conversations as it related to aggregation facilities and commissary processing facilities. And there's challenges in that, especially scalability coming into play. There's a lot of efforts and conversations going on throughout the state. Maryland Department of Agriculture has a seat on the Food System Resiliency Council, which is a state body that makes annual recommendations, and cold storage and processing and actually regulatory barriers to small and beginning farmers was one of the recognized challenges that was spelled out. So I don't have any clear-cut answers that we're going to get one, but it's become more and more clear that it's necessary. We will continue to collaborate with our state partners in the industry to try to see what resources can be provided to see some of these facilities stand up. I believe it was 2 years ago where unfortunately we had some contracts fall through as it related to apples and the orchards in the state, and we had perfectly good fruit sitting on a tree. And now we are in a state within the state and the country right now where we don't want anything staying on the tree. Any way we can continue to preserve and open up those opportunities. I believe that some of these procurement programs that are coming online, the Maryland State Department of Education and the school systems, as well as the Certified Local Farm and Fish program, finding ways to get local products into some of these institutions is going to pretty much require and push us to establishing those types of processing. School systems can't accept or won't accept, raw carrots. They won't know what to do with them. So the idea of further processing is absolutely something on the forefront. This document in of itself, sorry to always bring everything back to the guidance document, but this was a really, really great exercise to see where some of the challenges exist within the framework of getting some of these opportunities. Because although this was clearly farm focused as it relates to what's happening on the farm and agritourism, a lot of the environmental health challenges about scalability and raw agricultural products were also written out throughout this process. So,
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Great questions from Councilmember Balcom. Before I move forward with another council member, can you very quickly tell me or clarify, right now in Montgomery County, when it comes to stormwater management permits, that's run by DPS in the county. But my understanding is that in other places across the county, they're actually run by the Soil Conservation District. Are we the only ones that use DPS for approvals for stormwater management?
I'm going to give a great bureaucratic answer of it depends.
Oh, great.
So in Montgomery County, and rightfully so, as Wes described, depending on the type of activity is depending on who is the lead agency on the regulatory guidance. There are certainly other counties that have the soil conservation districts as the lead on more type of operations than we do here in Montgomery County, and that's their prerogative. But the district and DPS have a very good, Office of Agriculture as well, have a very good working relationship together. And I believe we are following the letter of the law. I'm looking to Les for that one. I believe we're doing exactly as the law describes and trying to find ways to make it as painless as possible.
Okay. I won't comment. Thank you. Councilmember Sales.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to Mr. Is it Prow? Prue and Mr. Knapp from the state for joining us today, and thank you to Director Scheffel for co-hosting the inaugural Farm to Table Symposium we held on Monday with the Secretary of Agriculture, Congresswoman Delaney, and Delegate Chi, and many others. I think this is so essential given that agriculture is our state's, #1 revenue driver. that we're having this discussion and bringing together our key stakeholders. Given the Maryland Agricultural Commission's deadline for receiving feedback on the definition, when can we expect any reports or otherwise relating to the definition? Or is this an ongoing committee?
So the Ag Commission meets, I believe, quarterly with subcommittee meetings. Actually, the subcommittees are happening today. There is a value-added subcommittee, and they're probably discussing the definition as we talk right now. That's ongoing. So that has been brought up in the Ag Commission's general meeting, publicly posted meetings, to discuss the concept of where could the Ag Commission take this stance. I think it is to be seen of how formal this proposal is going to be, but I know obviously this document had engaged a lot with the regulatory side. When it comes to defining something, the industry is going to have to be at the table, so that is going to be a drawn-out process. So I can't speak to whether or not we would see a legislative action as it relates to defining agriculture here as quickly as the year has seemed to go by, but it's certainly something the Ag Commission is interested in determining.
Okay, and Director Shuffle, is the Ag Advisory Group going to be submitting feedback regarding the definition as we see it in Montgomery County?
Yes, ma'am. So first, thank you for hosting Farm to Table Symposium. It was a wonderful event. But yes, the Ag Advisory Committee has been reached out to Harrison Palmer, the gentleman who chairs or runs the Maryland Ag Commission, and will be providing comment.
Awesome, thank you. We also worked with Visit Montgomery and our alcohol and beverage services for this symposium. How are you working with other tourism groups across the state?
So I know that, again, the Maryland's Best program within the Maryland Department of Agriculture is within our marketing team. And so there's been collaboration as it relates to our various themes and promotions, whether it be promoting the ice cream trail, Take a Bite Out of Maryland Apple Month. We have a variety of promotions in which we make sure that we tie in with each and every county. When it comes to craft beverage, I do push that a little bit towards our Office of Tourism within Commerce as it relates to the destination marketing, but our Maryland's Best folks are always pushing for people to support their local farms and consume locally grown products.
No, I mean, how are they contributing to the definition of agritourism, agribusinesses?
Oh, through the Maryland Ag
Yes.
Commission process. Again, very, very early as far as the conversations, and I'm missing the subcommittee to be here with this presentation. So I'll definitely have to do a little catch up in that. But again, the fact that the conversation's being had in a public facing setting would definitely bring it up to the Governor's Intergovernmental Commission of Agriculture too, before anything is moved forward or determined for sure. And we can certainly make sure that we are connecting with these local tourism boards and offices as well.
Okay, I don't believe we had the makeup of this board that's been created. What's the engagement of the farmers in this process? How are they at the table?
For the Ag Commission?
Yeah.
So the Maryland Ag Commission is a statutory body, actually also recently expanded through through legislative action. It is made up of members representing various industry seats. So there is a dairy seat, there is a agritourism seat, equine seat across all the industries. So it is the Ag Commission is an advisory body to Secretary Addix, whereas the Governor's Intergovernmental Commission on Agriculture is an advisory body to Governor Moore.
Okay.
So one is internal facing MDA, made up of members of the industry, and then GICA is made up of members of the cabinet and industry stakeholders.
I just wanted to say that the current chair of the Maryland Ag Commission is Kelly Lewis, a gentleman who runs Rupert Nursery. So we are well represented.
Oh, very good. Thank you, thank you. And then are you able to share any benefits or drawbacks to having a statewide definition? Will that preempt local jurisdictions in adopting the state definition?
So again, pretty early in the process, I think what's obviously the idea of a definition at the state level can sometimes be a scary thing to industry, which is why the Ag Commission's even discussing it, is because we've gotten to a point where the Maryland Department of Agriculture does not have a statutory definition of what agriculture or a farm is, but fellow state agencies do. So the Department of Agriculture not being the reference point for that has been brought up in a bunch of different forums, and so that's what's being discussed. And it's again, this isn't necessarily going to be a land use definition that puts anything in stone, rather a policy, reference document or definition of how the Maryland Department of Agriculture interacts with the industry, because we haven't addressed or updated that in a while as well. We do have a value-added agricultural specialist. We have Maryland's Best. We're seeing agriculture evolve. Just getting ahead of that and recognizing what the future of agriculture looks like, I think, is what the Ag Commission's looking at. I frankly haven't seen an updated definition just yet, but I look forward to when they meet here in a couple weeks of hearing what they've come up with. I know each industry representative has gone out to their respective industries to try to get feedback, and this is just the beginning.
Okay. And then if you have this information available, who's the leading jurisdiction for agritourism in our state?
Even those that we would call a gold standard run into challenges. So it's hard to say. I won't be able to give you a solid answer, but there are absolutely some jurisdictions that have started to move on. And I know Montgomery County had a recent study as well, but there's some counties that are doing strategic plans for agriculture. There are some jurisdictions that don't even have not just an Office of Agriculture, but not even an agricultural specialist, that are starting to position themselves to bring somebody on, recognizing that agriculture is becoming, that industry that requires that business development and that support because of how complicated the regulatory framework is. I think all counties are doing it their own way. That's probably, the get out of jail free answer there. But the counties that have agritourism defined and processes to move forward are being the most successful. Montgomery County has a lot more materials than other jurisdictions as it relates to informing businesses of what they need to do and how they can be prepared. We talked about the need to start locally. I think that Montgomery County is doing a very good job of that. But now we just need to clean up some of the regulatory disconnects as it relates to state law and policy trickling down to local enforcement and interpretation.
Okay. And are there any concerns about the state soil conservation district becoming the sole reviewer approver of any land use related decisions for agritourism businesses?
So I'll clarify that the Soil Conservation District is a technical assistance entity. It is not a reviewer and it's not an inspector, which is why I think maybe we run into some challenges when we talk about some of these diversified uses on farms. You're seeing a lot of different solutions county by county as it relates to what an MOU might look like and to what extent a soil conservation district may be involved. The point made earlier is that soil conservation districts are kind of tied to the definition and concepts of what agricultural activities are, and right now they are the raw practices of growing things, storing things, and pasturage. So they're having a hard time engaging and supporting farms as they expand into value-added agriculture. That is not to discount the need for stormwater management, but there are certain counties that are getting creative with how soil conservation districts could possibly play a role as they are boots on the ground engaging with farms on a regular basis.
Oh, good. That would be helpful to read through in the final report when it's available. I know we talked about an aging workforce with our farmers, and our public school system has a CASE program, the Curriculum on Agricultural Science and Education program, but we have seen diminished numbers for student enrollment that has led to it's probably not going to be funded. And just wanted to know if you have any examples of agricultural education programs in K through 12 that are seeing, numbers around retention and growth across the state.
No specific examples, but obviously a very, very timely conversation. The Maryland Ag Education Foundation has obviously had some conversations about farm to school, not just in food, but in education, and making sure students understand where their food comes from, as well as some of these CTE and trade school opportunities as it relates to apprenticeships, internships, and connecting to an agricultural workforce. I think it's been really, really important, and a very common discussion has been that agriculture doesn't have to necessarily be on the farm anymore. There's a lot of opportunities to connect and be supporting industries. So the way that AI is a very common and thematic conversation. There's been a few conferences around that to engage the school students. So not as far as curriculum's concerned, but a lot of what plays into value-added agriculture, agritourism, and the ability to connect with members of the public is certainly an outside of school facet that really has to be preserved and nurtured. And as you've seen through this report thus far, is that there are still some regulatory hurdles for sure.
Definitely. Just thinking about the size of our agricultural reserve, do you know the average size of our county farms, Mike?
I think it's roughly like 115 acres.
Okay. And do we know how much of the land is unaccounted for that isn't manned by anyone in particular?
What do you mean by unaccounted for?
Like land that may be up for sale, that's not
our office doesn't track that, council member, but we are actively engaging with other, whether it's nonprofits or anybody who's interested in that. Topic comes to mind is Montgomery Countryside Alliance Land Link program. So I think most of the council is familiar with that. That's a fantastic program that it's basically a dating service between people who want to farm and landowners who are interested in opening up their farm for that type of operation.
Okay. And how does this size compare with farms across the state, the average size?
Yeah, so that's actually a bit above average. So the average farm size is 107 acres throughout Maryland. 70% of the farms in Maryland are less than 100 acres. 55% of them are less than 50 acres. And a little over 16% are less than 10 acres. So when we talk, and we didn't cover this too much in depth, but when it comes to zoning and land use, there's still some concepts that agriculture and farms are 3 or 5 acre minimum. And then you enter urban agriculture, small scale, you're probably seeing microgreens at your local farmer's market that are frankly being grown in a basement or a shed. How do you account for that? Especially because there's plenty of people trying to contribute to the food supply chain. So the landscape is changing.
Okay. Yeah, I was just wondering if we are assessing which agritourism activities are yielding the best and most consistent return on investment. Given the size and the options that are available, it would be good to see some sort of matrix on the size, return on the investment of what they're providing and how that's being yielded in the state. Revenue projections, if possible.
That was actually just discussed this morning as it relates to the measurables and understanding the impact of agritourism on the state. Again, it's difficult to capture with how tourism dollars are spent and tourism dollars are collected. It's going to be the same challenge with a processing license that covers all kinds of food processors, but received and understood and agreed.
Okay. And then my last question, another concern that was brought up at the symposium was the challenges with connecting with farms across sectors, and just wanted to know if you mentioned AI, if there's any technological advancements to connect local farmers with restaurants to reduce waste, facilitate networking, exchange, commerce. Any models in the state or other jurisdictions that you're aware of?
Yeah, I can't name any specific ones over another, but there's absolutely some models and apps and softwares that are getting developed for that type of effort. Through the pandemic, there was quite a handful that were being utilized to get food to people trying to access it. As it relates to the institutional and sort of the retail buyer space, I don't know of anything at the top of my head, although that is certainly trending. The idea of when you talk about aggregating food and processing food, that's all part of the equation. Institutional buyers are the same as restaurant and potential chain buyers as well. well as far as needing particular specs. When we're dealing with farms that are of the scale to which we just shared and talked about, where a majority of them are pretty small scale in contrast on a national stage, there is a need to appropriately aggregate and make sure that we are connecting those producers. And so I think that the institutional procurement side of things is going to be a really good exercise for us.
Yes, because I know the governor just instituted, I think it was last year, about 20% of the food that is procured at the state needs to come from local farms. And just wanted to see if you had any updates about that.
Yeah, so again, the programs that tie to that is the school system is undertaking their own initiatives to set up some programs and potential software to connect and make sure they're procuring local products. You also have the Certified Local Farm and Fish Program, which is housed within the Department of Agriculture. So a producer interested in selling to institutions registers with us with evidence of a current nutrient management plan, and they can get listed in that directory. And only producers in that directory will qualify for those procuring local products. So it's how we're keeping track of those that are participating, and we're consistently encouraging participation in that program.
Awesome. Looks like something we might want to adapt to the local jurisdictions. Thank you so much. Looking forward to more updates.
Great questions by Councilmember Sales. I also would like to recognize the amazing work Lori and Sales has done. That food to table symposium that you just did on Monday. Now, I was not there because I was here with Council Vice President Yowando and Council Member Andrew Fritzen. We were in committee work session right here. That's why we couldn't go there. But every single person who attended that event spoke highly of it. Every single one, and it has been quite a few people, and it speaks about your leadership, and you need to be recognized for that. And I hope you do this every year so we can go next time. We'll make sure that we don't have a committee work session that day. But thank you for that. And Chair Fritzen.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. I really appreciate it and echo the comments about the symposium. Sorry I couldn't make it. I'm very glad that Councilmember Balcom was there the entire time, and really appreciate the fact that you did it and all of the broad cross-section of stakeholders who participated. Just wanted to follow up on the local food procurement as chair of the Council of Governments Food and Agriculture Regional Member Policy Committee at the regional level. We are working on this, have been working on this, and stay tuned. There's going to be a regional call to action for all the member jurisdictions to take action when it comes to procuring and securing local food sources to support our agricultural community, our climate, to make sure that we have healthier options. So that should be forthcoming very soon. So coming to a jurisdiction near you, including here. So stand by on that. But a lot of work has taken place at the regional level, really exciting. The state is working on this. The regional jurisdictions are working on this, and we're working on this at the local level. And Heather Bruskin has been a great regional leader on that from our Office of Food Systems Resilience as well, and a great partner on that. So I'm really excited to be able to bring that forward once COG actually moves forward with its work here at the local level to the council. I am really happy that we had this conversation. I think it was a really good follow-up to the conversation that we had back in the summer. It speaks to the complexity of these issues and the nuance and complication of them. Value add is really important for agriculture because it's a very difficult business that is getting harder and harder. And it is a business, and it does have to be economically sustainable. We largely benefit from it in our grocery stores and at our farmers markets, and maybe to go picking for apples and berries and other things that we go and do with Pick Your Own. And, for us, it's a casual Saturday or Sunday. But for many people in the agricultural community, for so many families, it is their way of life. It is the way that they sustain jobs and economic opportunities for many people in our community and throughout our region. it's very nuanced. I look forward to the state definition, if we could urge that sooner rather than later, and to keep us posted on what that looks like. The key here is agriculture and thinking through the impact on agriculture. There's a reason why it's the agricultural reserve. There's a reason why we're talking about value-added agriculture, not agricultural something. The modifier that we're modifying is ag, and I just think we should make sure that we're centering those issues and really thinking through them and making sure that we understand the full breadth and complexity of these dynamics. This is going to be a very important conversation that we continue. It's going to require partnership between local jurisdictions, the region, and the state. That's true on the local food procurement we talked about earlier. But in general, it's true on how we address these issues of an economy that is changing, a business model that's getting more challenging, and the need to make sure that we are protecting and preserving the decisions that have been made and the reasons why they were made, while ensuring that we're relevant for the current market dynamics and community needs that exist, and we set ourselves up for the future. No easy task. If the job were easy, we wouldn't have to sit and meet about it on a regular basis, and we wouldn't be here to do the work that we are. But this is the challenge before us. It will be the challenge for the remainder of this council term, and frankly, it's going to be the challenge for this body as we move forward into the future. So really appreciate the leadership and really appreciate the partnership, and look forward to continuing it as we move forward. And we just urge you to help us define what we're talking about. It would be helpful if we had a consistent definition of what a farm is. That seems to be fairly important if we're figuring out how to address farming, and understanding what a farm is seems fairly important to agriculture, since that seems to be at the core of what we're talking about here. And I think consistency across the state would be helpful as we weigh these various land use dynamics and the challenges of agriculture. They are acute in Montgomery County, but they're not unique to Montgomery County. And so the consistency across the state and throughout the region, I think, would be really helpful. I'll just note, and I'll close on this, everybody who I talked to in Loudoun County, the vice chair of the farm committee on COG is in Loudoun County. And I talk to people in Loudoun County all the time. And every person I meet, to a person in Loudoun County, the one thing that they share is, boy, you are so fortunate to have the agricultural reserve. And we are trying to undo some of the mistakes that we have made over the last 45 years since you all did what you did with the agricultural reserve, and boy, are we jealous. And I just think it's important that we got problems, we got challenges, we've got issues that we've got to work through, but we're here for a reason, because of very intentional, specific decisions that were made. And we have a really important job to do to make sure that we're holding true and honoring the very difficult, challenging decisions that were made, and making sure that we protect something that we're very fortunate to have. So with that, I'll yield back, and I appreciate everybody's work and partnership.
We have Council Vice President Yovondo.
Yeah, very briefly, and among the other things that we're always championed and said people are jealous of us is our great ag office. So thank you, Mike and team. As was mentioned, thank you to our state partners for coming. Not every county, and many counties don't have people dedicated to working on agriculture. So we're very fortunate for your work. Just wanted to plant a seed, pun intended, on the, I remember reading something a while back about places that are really doing agritourism, where it's like a flourishing market, and some of them are overseas, right? Like Italy, Taiwan. I remember seeing some article somewhere where you can go and like test the crops and like practice farming, like almost a demo on the farm. Again, a lot of I'm sure that freaks you out because all the regulations that go through your head there. But I would just, if there's any thought, as we obviously define what a farm is and what agriculture is and what agritourism is, I just hope that I hope the bodies that are looking into this, and since you're here and I know you're in those rooms, would take back some of those broader and again, we have to, I agree, our agricultural reserve should be for agriculture, but we want to be open and aware of things that are bringing in people in other places that are connected to, like that farm, like I said, in Taiwan, where they're actually like trying to teach people how to farm, right, for example, or allowing them to taste the crops. And I know we have some of that, you know, we have tasting, particularly on the wine side and other things. But so feel free to comment or not, but it's just something I wanted to throw out there and just take back as you're in these rooms and having these conversations, that we're looking broadly. And I know California, Hawaii, there's other places in the U.S. that are doing interesting things. But I'm hoping we can learn from others as we try to figure out our own path forward. So thank you.
It's okay. You don't need to say anything, because I think the Council Vice President, that was a great way to end the session today, thinking about the future and what else can we be doing to support agriculture, but being more, with more of a vision to do so, okay? With that, we look forward to getting updates. Director Shuffle, thank you so much for all the work that you're doing, and I know we depend on you to getting updates from the state on these issues, and we look forward to all the updates on the outdated regulations that we currently have, so we can move forward as a county and as a state. With that, this work session is adjourned.